On March 18th, 1990, the most audacious art heist of all time took place at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Two men dressed as police officers were admitted into the building by security, claiming to be responding to a disturbance call.
In 81 minutes, 13 pieces of art were stolen. Among the portraits, stripped from their frames, were works by Vermeer, Degas, and Rembrandt. Estimated at $500 million, the heist has been categorized as the largest and most frustrating of all time. Theories of their whereabouts and those who perpetrated the crime are abundant.
In this podcast series, we will dig as deep as possible into the case, the theories, and the social and economic impact the greatest unsolved art heist of all time had on the community. This is Empty Frames. Welcome back to Empty Frames. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
Tim, I'm a bit confused because you said welcome back to Empty Frames, and I thought you were going to say missing or crawl space. I love the fact that we just pop up these Empty Frame episodes just like right in your feed. Here you go. Bam. New Empty Frames episode. But I'm doing great. Excited about this Empty Frames episode. I hope everyone else is doing wonderful. How are you? That's like, where are the paintings? That's a question, but my question is, how are you?
Well, thank you. I am doing pretty well, Lance, and I'm really excited as well to bring our Empty Frames listeners another interview, a really interesting interview, and we touch on a lot of topics. We speak with a fellow named Eric Ulis. He has been on some TV shows. He's dug real deep into the disappearance and skyjacking of D.B. Cooper, which is interesting. We speak about that a little bit. But Eric has turned his sights to the Gardner Heist, and he just visited the Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts recently. So we speak a little bit about that, and we also speak a little bit about the new clue in the Gardner Heist, and we play a quick news segment from NBC Boston 10 when we get to that point. And I think that lead is pretty interesting as well, but it's definitely not our focus of this conversation.
No, and it's always good to get fresh voices and fresh eyes on the Gardner Heist. It's been so long. We're going on 32 years coming up in March, and we'll take anybody on who has had such a reputation in the field of investigations like Eric Ulis. He's an independent investigator. He's done great work on D.B. Cooper, actually turned up a lot of material that's connected to D.B. Cooper. And the way he's approaching the heist is from a very microscopic level, very detail-oriented, and honestly trying to hold the authorities' feet to the fire on why we're still going on another year without any answers in this. And it's you can read the frustration in his voice too.
And also, Lance, one thing that we haven't covered since our last episode is the death of Robert Genteel. And our very last episode that we did on this podcast feed was with a great newscaster named Dennis House, and he was, I believe, the last interview that Robert Genteel ever gave before his death. And Robert Genteel, of course, was known as the sole remaining person of interest in the Gardner Museum heist, but he died at 85 in September of 2021.
And the longer this goes on without any answers, Tim, this is what tends to happen with any mystery. All of the people who have some connection to it, whether it's factual or not, or some knowledge of it, they start to get older, they start to pass, and all of the questions are just that much harder to answer. If there are people out there who know where the paintings are, which Eric believes that someone does know where the paintings are, then they need to provide some sort of information, because soon it's just going to be lost in the course of history. You're going to have another person pass and another person, and with them go the answers.
And I hope you enjoy this interview with Eric Ulis, and check out his website, ericulis.com. That's ERICULIS.com. And he's done some writing about the Gardner Heist on there, as well as D.B. Cooper. So it's an interesting site, and you get to hear a little bit of his background as well. So thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We do hope to be back on Empty Frames pretty soon, actually, with a follow-up interview in the next few weeks. So thanks a lot for listening.
And if you have any information on the whereabouts of the stolen pieces of art from the museum, please go to crawlspace-media.com and hit the contact form. We'd love to hear from you.
And welcome to the podcast, Eric Ulis. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys?
We're doing excellent. Great to have you on. If anyone is familiar with you and your work, they know that your primary mystery that you cover is D.B. Cooper. And if anybody's aware of my absolute loathing of the D.B. Cooper mystery, they're probably wondering why you're on, especially on Empty Frames. But anyway, that's joking aside. Well done with everything, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Look forward to this.
Well, great. Well, we connected recently, and we were talking about the Gardner Heist and, of course, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist from 1990. And you recently visited the Gardner Museum. Can you tell us what your experience was like?
As you noted, my experience has been primarily in the D.B. Cooper case for the last 14 or so years. But that I've been involved in some newer projects, one of which is the Gardner Museum heist. And that's a mystery of particular interest to me. But so I've started digging into that quite a bit recently. And as you noted, I was actually in Boston a couple of weeks ago, actually, and got an opportunity to tour the museum for the first time, which was spectacular. And I'm one of these guys who thinks that, obviously digging into FBI files and police reports and, talking with people, witnesses, this type of thing is great, but there really is no replacement for actually stepping into the scene of the crime, so to speak, and, taking it all in and trying to conceptualize it, because I think that's just a big part of any cold case, whether you're talking the Gardner Museum heist or something else like the D.B. Cooper case. I try to put myself in the shoes of the culprits and try to kind of think through what would I do if I was that person. And obviously viewing the Gardner Museum, having an opportunity to see that place, which is spectacular, of course, by the way, and I would recommend anybody who's in Boston to check it out. It went a long ways towards giving me a really good, solid feel for what happened, or at least what I believe happened. And I think that lends itself, frankly, to creating a somewhat better understanding, and to that end, hopefully, ultimately solving this thing, figuring out where this artwork is.
And you did, you were so excited when you went to the Gardner Museum, and I remember you texted us and you were like, Anthony Amore just welcomed me with open arms, and he took me out to dinner, and we had some drinks, and he just regaled me with all of this Gardner Heist knowledge. That's really impressive that you got to know him so well.
Yeah, I think probably ghosted is a more accurate term, but we can roll with that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I must have misinterpreted the email.
It sounds badass, but no, I have talked with Anthony, and I have communicated with him via email as well. That said, it's been largely one way for the last at least few weeks, leading up to the time that I was there. I think the term is ghosted. I think that's an accurate term, which is a matter of some frustration. But hey, I don't take it personally. I get it. I mean, I'm sure the guy has all kinds of people reaching out to him. But that said, that's the truth of the matter. No drinks and no private tour or anything of that nature of the Gardner Museum.
For the people who are listening who are passionate about the Gardner Heist, can you give a little background on the work you've done searching for an answer in D.B. Cooper's mystery so that they can sort of get a sense of like your pedigree? As
I mentioned, I've been familiar with the D.B. Cooper case, which is the skyjacking that took place in November of 1971. Unsolved. It's the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history. Tall and short of it is a guy shows up on a jet in Portland, Oregon, skyjacks it as it's flying up to Seattle, Washington, which is a quick 36-minute flight. Ostensibly carries a bomb on board and says, listen, I want $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes. Once we land in Seattle, if I get that, I'll let all the passengers go. The authorities delivered. They delivered the 4 parachutes and $200,000 in cash. D.B. Cooper let the passengers go in Seattle. The 3 pilots, of course, stayed on board the jet, and one of the flight attendants as well stayed on board the jet. The plane took off from Seattle, heading toward Mexico City, but there was a refueling stop scheduled in Reno, Nevada. And about half an hour after the jet took off from Seattle, with the 3 pilots on the flight deck and also the flight attendant at that point on the flight deck, so there was no one in the back of the jet. About half an hour after taking off from Seattle, D.B. Cooper put on a parachute, tied the money to his person, and jumped from the jet, never to be seen or heard from again. So to this day, they have no idea who D.B. Cooper was, his real identity. They don't know whether he lived or died. There's a lot we don't know about the guy. There was a portion of his ransom, $6,000 of which was found very mysteriously about 8 years after the skyjacking, buried in the sand along the Columbia River there in the Portland, Oregon area. And that's about it. But it's a case that I started investigating years ago. And it's just one of these things that started out as a guilty pleasure, but ultimately just grew into something much bigger. Ended up writing a book about it, ended up headlining a History Channel show about that premiered in was 2020, November of 2020. Also appeared on Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates in the last several months, part of another streaming service. I won't name the name of the streaming service, but a big docu-series about the case that's going to be released later this year. But so I consider myself somebody who's kind of no nonsense. I believe in science. I believe in math. I'm not conspiracy driven. And I'll let the evidence speak for itself. And I think that that served me well as far as the Cooper case is concerned. I think there are some parallels between the Cooper case and the Isabella Gardner Museum. And also there are some things about the Isabella Gardner Museum, and specifically the way law enforcement has managed or handled this investigation after 32 years, that I think that frankly, they could learn by looking at the way the D.B. Cooper case has been managed in that case, 50 years.
Oh, interesting. I'm curious what it is. Anything further on that? What could be learned by the D.B. Cooper investigation for the Gardner investigation?
Sure, absolutely. I think primarily it comes with just the manner in which law enforcement is dealing with this very cold case at this point. In the case of D.B. Cooper, it was like Isabella Gardner, just dead as a doorknob. There was just nothing coming out of the woodwork anywhere. They had absolutely no idea. There was a special agent who was managing the case, heading the case in Seattle, a guy named Larry Carr for the FBI. He decided to open it up. He said, listen, it's been at this point, X number of years, 4 decades, whatever the case may happen to be. We're not getting anywhere. What the hell have we got to lose by opening up these files with some of this information that we've held back and putting it out there to the public? Larry's rationale was that, hey, listen, when it comes to bank robbers and bank robberies, which the FBI handles, of course, the MO or the approach that the FBI takes is, let's do an investigation. Let's get as much information as possible. Then let's put as much as possible out to the public that we can. The idea being that the public will bring a suspect to us. And they've been very effective as far as that goes. So, Special Agent Larry Carr rationalized, what the hell? Let's look at the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. It's essentially a bank robbery in the sky. Let's get as much information out there as possible to the public 4 decades on, and let's see what comes of it all. And I would argue that we have learned an awful lot about the case from 2007 when this first started to where we are here in 2022. Along the lines, in recent years, 6 years ago, through a Freedom of Information Act request, the FBI started opening up their files related to the investigation. Thus far, we've got about 30,000 pages of FBI files that are out related to the case. Now, a lot of this stuff is heavily redacted, and a lot of it isn't, frankly, worth a damn. But there are some nuggets and there are some gems in there. And the net effect of all of that, guys, is you get people like me and others that sort of crowdsource this thing, and they start taking a look at the evidence and the investigation. And it's not secondhand stuff that you read through the media, which is not always reliable. And they start doing investigations of their own. And over the course of the last several years in the DB Cooper case, I think as a private investigative community, we've done an enormous amount of heavy lifting and have learned an awful lot. Not only have we identified specific areas where the FBI made mistakes, critical mistakes, because these people are not infallible, but there's a lot of other areas and a lot of other newer evidence that we've discovered and newer things that we've come up with, in part because, again, the amount of, the state-of-the-art technology and so forth that we are able to avail ourselves of now is completely different than what it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth. So in the case of the Gardner, they need to do the same thing. It's been 32 years. What the hell are you guys doing holding anything close to the vest at this point? You either want to recover the art or you don't want to recover the art. Arguably, after nearly a third of a century, what you're doing hasn't worked. And I get it. I know everybody wants to be the rock star, the guy who figures out where the artwork is and everything else. But at some point, you got to kind of put that aside and you got to say, listen, we're at the end of the day, what's of paramount importance is finding out where that missing artwork is, where those 13 pieces of artwork are, valued at between $500 million and $1 billion. And obviously the cultural significance is hard to quantify as well. So the only way that's going to happen is, Anthony Amore and also the FBI being a little bit more generous as far as what they put out there to the public. Standing on a stage 9 years ago, 2013, saying, yeah, we know who did it, but we don't know where the artwork is, doesn't cut it. It's just, I live in the real world. That doesn't cut it. So I think that there needs to be a sea change in terms of how they approach this. In fact, I had a conversation with Steve Kirkshin, as you well know, who worked, former reporter with the Globe there, 3-time Pulitzer winner. And he agreed. He said, listen, I think, really the only way we're going to really make any progress on this is file a Freedom of Information Act request and see what we can do about prying some of those investigative reports and things of that nature from the FBI. And let's have at it. Let's get some fresh eyeballs on this and see what we can do as far as it goes.
And you had mentioned this new technologies, and so much has come in the way of solving cold cases in the past 30, 40 years. The research and the application of these technologies to your investigation of DB Cooper, how do you see that? Because you mentioned it, but can you give a little more detail on how do you see something like that working in the Gardner heist, and where would the FBI start to apply these applications?
Well, first of all, there's DNA, and there's absolutely no doubt about it that some DNA was left behind. It seems all but certain. Now, obviously, it's been an awful long period of time. I don't know exactly how the frames that were left behind, the broken glass, things of this nature, I don't know how it has been preserved, if it's been preserved at all, but that's one thing. One thing, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, is how the artwork, a couple of those pieces of artwork were actually cut from the frames. There may be a way to look at it microscopically at a microscopic level, the cut around the canvas there, and you may be able to identify a type of metal, a type of steel, something of that nature. So therefore, identify the type of tool that was used. Now, that may seem like who gives a shit, but it actually may be very telling. I've seen this in the Cooper case. You discover these small, finite pieces of a particular grade of stainless steel, for example, and it can tell you an awful lot about the instrument or perhaps even where the culprits came from, things of that nature. So that's what I'm talking about as far as that is concerned, applying some of the science. And I'm sure there are other ways as well to see what we can come up with in terms of, hard, physical, tangible evidence. Not to mention things like, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but those paint chips. I know that, some of the paint chips were submitted to, I guess probably Tom it came through Youngworth and ended up going to Mashburg or something like that. But one way or the other, somebody looked at these old paint chips, McCrone Laboratories in Chicago, whom I'm very familiar with. They actually did a lot of analysis regarding to the DB Cooper case, world-class people. Perhaps there's something that can be learned from looking at that in a little bit greater detail as well. Again, some kind of DNA or, maybe whoever, etched off those paint chips or whatever, maybe there's something left behind there at a microscopic level that can tell us something about, again, the type of instrument. Perhaps there's pollen or something of that nature on those chips. I mean, that's the kind of research that I'm talking about here. And again, we're 32 years out, man. I mean, like, we're either gonna sit here and just talk about this shit, or we're actually gonna, avail ourselves of some of the technology and things that we have in 2022, and see what we can learn, and then at the same time also put boots on the ground and start searching for this stuff.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you're talking about trying to identify the instrument that was used to cut out the paintings. And I guess I always assume that section of the paintings were in evidence with the FBI. Am I wrong in assuming that, or is that the case? Or is it in evidence with, like, maybe the Boston police?
Well, my understanding is that that's actually sitting up in the museum right now. I think Amore has at least one of the frames, one of the Rembrandts, the frames for the Rembrandts or I should say not the frames, because the frames are on the wall, but the stretcher, and that there are like remnants of the original canvas kind of around the outside. That's my understanding. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff where that really should be in evidence with the FBI or law enforcement. It should be preserved in under ideal conditions. Now, having said that, because apparently it hasn't been preserved in ideal conditions, that's probably not going to help us a hell of a lot as far as DNA is concerned. But when you're dealing with something like stainless steel or pieces of metal or what have you, that's a different thing. I mean, that stuff doesn't degrade. So we still may be able to find something out or learn something about the crime by looking at this stuff today, even if it's been hanging out on the fourth floor of the museum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to go too far back, but can you share any of your thoughts on the DB Cooper case?
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, I've done an awful lot of research on this case, and for quite a while, I felt like I was getting really close to identifying who the guy was. And however, I have to say, in later, probably within the last year, I've come to the conclusion that he probably wasn't the guy that I was originally thinking. And that's based upon the evidence. Particular DB Cooper apparently was a smoker, a cigarette smoker. And the one suspect that I was focusing a lot of energy on wasn't a smoker. Fortunately for me, this suspect recently passed away. He died in January of 2001, so just over a year ago, and he was 94 years of age at the time he passed away. But I actually got a chance to speak with him and communicate with him. So, that highlights the importance of not wasting time. For example, in the Gardner Museum heist, because the more the time goes by, people die, and that's it. So having the opportunity to, in the case of Cooper, to speak with this one suspect, personally, I think was invaluable. So I'm at a point now where I think the evidence, in my mind, suggests that DB Cooper was probably somebody who came from the aerospace sector. I don't think from Boeing. I think he probably came from Pratt & Whitney, who obviously is a big aircraft engine manufacturer based in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, there's actually scientific evidence that points directly to a Pratt & Whitney type of connection. And I would say that DB Cooper was probably somebody who unbelievably just flew completely under the radar for the last 50 years. And that law enforcement has just never come across. So I'm actually doing a lot of research on that as well around the Connecticut area, seeing if there's some way I can identify somebody who was a former employee of Pratt & Whitney. Perhaps he got laid off, had a pink slip in hand, and decided, you know what, skyjacking a jet and extorting $200,000 is my ticket out, and because that appears to be the case. So, but again, to transition into the Gardner Museum heist, that illustrates, I think, very well the importance of not wasting time here. Again, it's been 32 years. That's enough time for law enforcement to kind of do things the way they've been doing. At this point, they got to open it up, and let's see what others can do. And obviously, they can continue to pursue the case as well. And let's see what happens here, because I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that our primary objective, is to recover those 13 pieces of artwork. And I at this point, we need people who are alive. I mean, we need to have firsthand testimony from people, because there's somebody knows something. Somebody knows something. There's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind. And yeah, if we wait another 50 years, well, those somebodies that know something obviously aren't going to be around any longer.
How wild would it be if, while you're looking into the Gardner heist, you realize that it was D.B. Cooper who robbed the Gardner Museum as well?
Well, I can tell you with certainty that isn't the case because the descriptions of the two thieves are completely different than the description.
I don't know, the one on the left kind of, you could convince me that that's D.B. Cooper.
I'm glad you brought this up, Lance.
A lot of that, though. A lot of people, because D.B. Cooper, we don't have any photographs. We just have sketches, kind of like with the two thieves here. And, frankly, they look like a heck of a lot of guys. I mean, the D.B. Cooper sketch looks like somebody straight out of a Mad Men episode. And yeah, I mean, it's just like a lot of people look like D.B. Cooper. But D.B. Cooper was about 45 years of age in 1971 at the time of the skyjacking. So obviously, by the time 1990 rolls around and the Gardner Museum heist takes place, this guy's probably 64, 65 years of age. And unless Rick Abbott and Randy are just really, really bad at, estimating the ages of these guys, we can probably safely assume that they're not one and the same.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Good point. I'm glad you brought it back to the Gardner and the guards who were working that night, Rick and Randy. I know you've got some thoughts on the guards from that evening. Can you? Let's move to the Gardner. What are your thoughts on the Gardner heist?
I believe it was an inside job. I believe there's an inside job element to it, and I think the statistics bear that out. I've heard 80% of museum heists are in an inside job at some level. And as I look at, Rick and also Randy that night, and frankly, the others there, I'm convinced of it. I'm convinced that there's an inside job aspect to it all. Again, I live in the real world. I look for the evidence. I'm not prone to conspiracies, things of this nature. So obviously the one individual that's come under the brightest spotlight, so to speak, has been Rick Abbott. And I think that that's fair. I think that's fair to put the bright hot spotlight on him. Now, I want to be very clear about this. I cannot prove that Rick Abbott was involved with this, and I don't know that anybody can prove that he was. Obviously, he's never been charged or prosecuted, so that kind of speaks for itself. What I will say is this. The actions of him that night were very suspicious. Not only the actions when he was doing his rounds, going through the blue room, he was apparently the last person there, but, to the roof. But obviously he's the guy who, opened the door momentarily moments before the two quote unquote police officers showed up and ultimately were successful in convincing Rick to let him in. He's the guy who stepped away from the alarm. I mean, there's just a lot of things here that are very suspicious, but great. I mean, worth considering, but I think the real thing that I have a hard time getting past is the physical concrete evidence from the motion detectors that apparently clearly show that the one and only individual who entered the blue room, of course, the room where the Chez Tortoni from Manet was lifted, that one and only person was Abbott. And there is no way to explain that, because apparently the system was working perfectly fine. And I think when you couple that realization at 12:27, he's walking through the blue room, he's, in and out for a minute. And then you look at some of the activities that followed, which included him 10 minutes later, 12:37, actually stepping outside of the roof on the fourth floor there momentarily on the Evans Way side of the museum. And then within 2 minutes, he's down in the Dutch room, and he's in that area for about 5 minutes. The Dutch room, of course, where the big part of the crime took place, is just very suspicious. To me, I'm just giving you my opinion. To me, it appears that Rick lifted the Manet from the blue room, made his way to the roof shortly thereafter, signaled probably with a flashlight to the thieves parked in a car on Evans Way at this point that this is a go. The thieves pulled around to the Palace Road side of the museum. Then obviously after Rick finished his rounds and Randy started his rounds, at that point appears that Rick opened the door to provide a clear signal to the thieves sitting in the car out there, who apparently waited for about 45 minutes for that signal, considering, those young students that saw the two police officers sitting in the car. That appeared to serve as some type of signal that it's like go time, and that, Randy's making his rounds and everything else. And I think that the reason that Rick dropped by the Dutch room again, after the visit to the roof, I just suspect that he dropped off the mayonnaise in the room somewhere, either in the conservator's lounge, which is behind the wall there, or somewhere in the Dutch room itself. So ultimately, while Rick would have been the one that lifted it from the blue room and deposited it, theoretically somewhere around the Dutch room, it would have been the two other thieves dressed as police officers, that would have removed the paintings from the museum. One thing I want to bring up to here before I forget is it's notable. What's notable about this crime and the crime scene is that when you're talking, the Dutch room or the Shore Gallery, which is where the majority of the artwork was taken, all the artwork that was taken from those two rooms were disassembled in the rooms that they were resided in. We can see the frames and the broken glass in the Dutch room and also the Shore Gallery. The one notable difference to the blue room is that the Chez Tortoni was not disassembled where it resided. It was not disassembled in the blue room. It apparently was disassembled in the security director's office because the frame was left there. So there is a little bit of a different MO as far as how those two parts of the crime took place, which I consider very suspicious as well, and hard to rationalize unless the truth of the scenario was something along the lines of what I said in terms of Rick just dropping the picture off in the Dutch room. Let's just call it the Dutch room, but somewhere near the Dutch room, and ultimately the thieves brought it down and for whatever reason disassembled it there near the security director's office.
Pretty cool breakdown of all of that. And I'm wondering, was this all going through your head when you visited the museum over the weekend? Obviously it was when you're standing there. What was that like when you first saw it after looking into this crime? Take us through those moments, like going into the museum and finally seeing them.
The thing is, obviously I had seen a lot of pictures of that center, lush courtyard area. So that looked totally familiar. And I was also very familiar with the layout of the museum. So I felt comfortable as far as that was concerned. I knew where the stairs were and the rooms and all this type of thing. The one thing that was really kind of interesting was just the rooms themselves, how kind of small they were and just almost just crammed full of artwork. I mean, it really had a very intimate, cozy kind of feel that I really didn't expect. Each of the rooms, especially some of the smaller rooms, smaller galleries. So that was one of the things that I noted, which was kind of fascinating. And I tried to imagine what it would be like to negotiate those corridors in those small rooms at night when it's dark. And that also gets me thinking, yeah, these guys were kind of familiar with this place. They knew what they were doing. The other thing that impressed me was just the sheer amount of art. And again, it's been brought up before. This is nothing new. The thought crosses my mind, what possesses them to take the pieces of art that they took? This is a short gallery, the finial. I mean, it's just one of those things where it seems kind of like an odd, eccentric mix of art, but where these things were located and trying to come up with a common thread that kind of ties in with all of it is a little bit difficult to do. So at the end of the day, it almost appears to me like, the Dutch room was obviously the target. The Rembrandts were clearly the target. The other stuff, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just kind of like, what the hell, we're here. Let's just grab a little extra stuff. I'm not sure. I don't know. but it was definitely eye-opening from that perspective. And also considering that these guys were there for 81 minutes. They're there for 81 minutes without a care in the world, apparently, taking all the time in the world. That definitely does give one the impression that they were not at all concerned about the cops showing up. And, which again, seems to suggest that perhaps, that seems likely that there's some sort of inside job aspect to it. Also got me thinking, to be perfectly honest with you, how do we know that the two guys that showed up weren't actually real cops, just crooked cops? I mean, they had uniforms. I don't know. They would have had radios. I mean,
how dare you, Eric?
What's that?
The boys in blue in Boston, they would never, there's never been a corrupt Boston police officer.
It's one of those things where it's like,
take that back.
I definitely am not going to assume that there weren't a couple crooked cops involved with this, or maybe one of them was a crooked cop, the other guy was just somebody else. But no, it definitely helps kind of put it into perspective. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And and also it's just very impactful, frankly, as you well know, walking in there and seeing these empty frames on the walls. I mean, it's just wow, it's just a powerful thing, and I'm not somebody that's like just a real appreciator or lover of art, but I got to tell you, man, I was really getting into like looking at these things close up. The one Rembrandt that they still have there and the other paintings there, it was spectacular. And actually I took the opportunity to shoot down to New York City a couple days later and went to the Met and checked out, the Rembrandts that they have there, the Vermeers and other Manets and so forth. And I certainly gained a much greater appreciation for the enormity of the crime and these masterpieces. But yeah, that's all stuff that, man, you only pick up by actually going there in person.
Yeah, the cultural relevance of the museum is off the charts, and it's endlessly fascinating to walk around in because it is a crime scene. And, you mentioned that those 81 minutes, it is something to think about when you're walking through there. It's like you can easily see every single piece of artwork in 81 minutes if you really want to in there. So what were the thieves doing with all that time? But you mentioned the word of the day, Eric, and it's finial. Did you see the news report from back in November of 2021? There was a jeweler from Boston named Paul Calantropo who said that he was shown the stolen finial by his ex-friend, Bobby Donati. And we're going to play a quick news clip about that right here.
3 decades, a new clue in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. A jeweler now coming forward, linking a longtime suspect to one of the pieces of stolen art. The case has had dozens of leads, as you know, but ultimately, the location of 13 stolen works of art remains a mystery. Our Tim Caputo caught up with the appraiser who may be able to answer some of the unanswered questions about the stolen art, Tim.
Well, Shannon, he's retired now down in Florida, this former appraiser. We tracked him down there in Florida, and he says he was shown one of those stolen items just weeks after the heist. He hasn't spoken publicly about it in 30 years, until now.
All these decades, everyone's been focused on the missing paintings from the Gardner Museum heist, but it's this small flagpole topper called a finial that might be the final piece needed to solve this puzzle.
I mean, it's not one of a kind. It's pretty valuable now. It might be worth $40,000 or $50,000. But back then, it probably was worth 10.
Paul Calantropo appraised fine art and jewelry in Boston for nearly 50 years. And he says a month after the heist, an old friend, Bobby Donati, who also happened to be a career criminal connected to the mob, showed up at his downtown shop with that eagle finial.
And he's like, hey, Paul, what's this worth? Everybody knows what this is. Everybody knows where it came from. It's not that valuable to begin with, but now it's really worthless,
Despite the encounter, he didn't go to police right away because, as a good appraiser, the other thing he values is his life.
This guy was also associated with people who murdered people for a living, so that was out of the question.
A year after the Gardner heist, Donati was murdered at his home in Revere. Calantropo says he finally went to the FBI around 5 years ago.
No, I know they didn't know about Bobby because when I first talked to them at the museum with the FBI and Anthony Amori, and I started telling them things, they were breaking their arms writing notes down, and they were super excited.
Donati has long been on the list of potential suspects, and a few years ago, the FBI said they identified the two men involved in the heist and said they're both dead, but the feds wouldn't name names. The FBI is now just focused on finding the art, as is Calantropo, who's finally talking publicly about this encounter with Donati, hoping that day won't be the last time he'll see the finial in person.
You know, I'm 70 years old. It breaks my heart not to see that stuff on the wall.
Now, I reached out to the FBI's Boston office. They wouldn't confirm or deny Calantropo's story or really anything about Donati or even the heist, saying this is all part of an ongoing investigation. But they also wanted to remind everyone there is still that $10 million reward for information leading to the return.
Okay, so Eric, what do you make about this latest lead in the Gardner heist?
I don't think it's worth a damn, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm highly suspect of any kind of witness testimony like this decades after the event. Again, and this isn't just me, voicing an opinion. I can apply some of the skills and the skill set that I have gleaned and learned from my years of experience in the DB Cooper case, and I can point to a lot of similarities. For whatever reason, there are always people years after the fact who, want to claim that they were the culprit or they knew the culprit or they happened to see something or come across something, for whatever reason. And, obviously every one of these people and every one of these confessions and pieces of testimony cannot be accurate. By definition, they all can't be. In fact, none of them may be. So I don't know what that tells us about the human condition and the need for some people to, I guess kind of be known for something in life. I don't know, or, to be associated with something, but I'm just highly suspect of that. Part of it too is part of the reason for that is irrespective of what the FBI and what Amore say, I just don't think organized crime was involved with this thing. I look at this thing, I approach it with a completely open mind, and I just can't find a single piece of credible evidence pointing to anybody in organized crime with being involved in this at any level whatsoever. And here's the thing, like, there's been a reward, $10 million. It's $10 million now, plus an immunity deal on the table for Lord knows how many years. The only people that cannot avail themselves of this are the two guys who lifted the art. Everybody else, we're good. If you purchase the stolen art or a portion of the stolen art, you can return it. You're not going to get prosecuted. And you're going to become rich, and you can go to Vegas and live out your life drinking, pina coladas out there. The fact that absolutely nobody has taken advantage of that deal is stunning. Not to mention, there have been organized crime figures that have done decades of time in jail. There have been other organized figures who have literally died in prison, others that could have died in prison. And there's just no way in hell that I'm buying this narrative that somebody knows where this stuff is and that nobody has taken advantage of it as a get out of jail free card or something of that nature, or just to simply cash in. So I'm just not buying it. I just see absolutely nothing to support the notion that organized crime was involved with it. And, I know that Anthony and the FBI is going to sit back and say, well, Eric, you don't know everything we know. And I'm going to say, well, that's great. But what I do know is there's been $10 million reward out there, a letter of immunity. Nobody's taken up on it. Again, people have served time in prison, died in prison. Nobody said anything about it. And apparently there's absolutely no credible evidence that any of the pieces have ever been seen or what have you by anybody, unless somebody wants to try to convince me that finial's sitting in the FBI evidence locker box in downtown Boston. We just don't know about it. They're just like, secreting it away, kind of like, for some reason after 32 years. So again, I live in the real world, and I don't see any reason to think that's the case. So in the case of Donati here, rolling up with the finial or whatever, to me, it just seems a little too fantastical, and it just doesn't pass the smell test as far as I'm concerned.
What do you do for a profession? Is this what you do full time?
In a way, I guess you could say. Obviously, starting with the D.B. Cooper special that I headlined on the History Channel, that's led to other things. So my time now for the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years has really been spent in that realm, working on the TV and TV production side of some of this stuff. So, and I'm working on some other programs related to these types of things. There's discussions as well taking place about the Gardner Museum. So I can't really get too much into the specifics as far as that goes. But so in a roundabout way, I kind of just came full circle and ended up finding myself in a space where I'm really just frankly leveraging, but my experiences over the better part of the last 15 years, looking into cold cases and things of this nature.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because your approach is very detail oriented, and it wouldn't surprise me if a previous life you were like an accountant or something.
Well, wasn't an accountant, but I'll tell you something that's a little bit new. Probably haven't had this happen before. For many years, I played professional level blackjack as a card counter. This was primarily through the 90s. So if you're familiar with the movie 21, the Kevin Spacey, MIT guys, that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing. Now, that seems to be wholly unrelated to this, but it's not. And the reason why is because when you're a card counter, you're applying pure math to the game blackjack and the casino. And for somebody who is proficient with it, they can pick up about a 1.5% to 2% edge over the casino. The one thing that I learned over my many years of playing that, and I was very successful with it, is that there's no room for hunch. I mean, if you're in a casino and you start playing hunches and things of that nature, you sure shit will end up losing every dollar you have. You have to play the math. You have to play exactly how you're supposed to play it, as the odds dictate. And that got drilled into my head. So applying, the skill set that really started back in those days in the 90s to my investigations moving forward, I've always had the same sort of approach, methodology, which is, put hunches and, conspiracy and all that stuff aside and really try to rely as heavily as possible upon the math and the science and the evidence and things of this nature. Now, that's not to suggest that, some conjecture isn't required here, because there's a lot that's still missing. But I'm a big fan of focusing on those things that I can really kind of back up and prove, and applying Occam's razor to the case, which is, the simplest explanation is usually the closest to the truth. And so just taking that type of approach and so forth, that's actually done an awful lot in terms of contributing to how I approach these cases and shaping the methodology that I apply.
Interesting. I am kind of a stickler about one thing, and it is that I think it's a fact that it's organized crime that pulled off the heist, because there's 2 people involved. So I kind of think saying it was organized crime is also a little bit of a cop-out, because that could just mean 2 people who've never committed a crime before happen to be organized, at least to some degree, the evening of this heist. So sorry for my complete sticklerism, but I feel like I always have to make that point.
Well, I think it's fair to say that as far as the FBI and Amore are concerned, when they talk about organized crime, they're talking about it in a somewhat more traditional sense. TRC Auto Electric, Donati, Gentile, Bobby Garenti, the usual suspects, and I just don't see it. There's nothing in my mind that actually substantiates any of that. Now, I realize that, Garenti's widow said this, and, Reisfelder's brother said that, and, the ex-sister-in-law said something else. I mean, I realize that, but, great. A lot of people said a lot of things about a lot of things, and you got a lot of money that's on the line here. So how do you really know what the hell the motives of these people are? The common thread with all of this shit, though, is not a single soul has been able to come up with anything substantive or material to prove that they've ever seen any of this artwork or ever came across any of this artwork. Nothing. We talk about the sending in the paint chips, Young Earth sending in the paint chips. Seriously, who gives a shit? Just send the damn finial in. Send the freaking finial in. That solves it. Okay, well, that's the finial. We believe you now. So it's just these kind of cat and mouse, kind of Mickey Mouse type of things. I'm just highly suspect of that. So I just, to me, honestly, it feels like we're dealing with a bunch of con men who are trying to figure out a way to con the authorities. It's like one big con, and they're all trying to con each other and, con businessmen who they think are legitimately, trying to buy, some of this artwork on the, underground artwork network or what have you. And to me, the whole thing just stinks to high heaven. None of it passes a smell test. I mean, at the end of the day, artwork talks, bullshit walks. Where is it? 32 years. I mean, there's nothing substantive or credible that anybody can point to that I'm aware of that indicates anybody has any idea where this stuff is. So that's, again, I live in the real world. That's where that's where I am. Now, okay, I mean, I get it. The FBI and Anthony Amore proudly, pound their chest and say, we know who the two guys were. We just haven't, we're on to the final stage or whatever of the investigation. Well, I'm kind of keenly aware of the fact that was 9 years ago and we still ain't got nothing. So that's sort of problematic in my world. That tells me that maybe you guys don't know as much as you think you know. Maybe again, like I said, to come full circle, maybe it's time that you guys open this thing up and let some other people have a look at this and take a look at some of the stuff and see what's going on here.
And have you ever spoken with one of our previous guests? He's a regular on Empty Frames, Paul Turbo Hendry.
I have not. I know who he is. I know who Art Brand is, and so I'm familiar with the experts, so to speak. That's not fair. And these are experts. I do know who these experts are, but I have not actually talked with any of them.
Yeah, I think it would be a fascinating conversation to have you and Turbo, because he's about like the process to get the paintings back, not so much concerned with who in fact perpetrated the crime, but hey, we could probably get them back if we did this, which is a price list, which is per painting, reward per item, instead of like the the thing that's been out there for years that hasn't worked, which is all of them back in reasonable condition. So he's about like making some itemized, subtle changes to the return process, and it does make sense. Yeah.
I mean, I think that it could certainly be fine-tuned as far as that goes. I don't know if it's going to make a difference because, if I'm sitting on some of this artwork, I know that I can cash in and maybe it's not in pristine condition. I'm still probably going to reach out to an attorney or somebody and see if maybe there's some way I can come up with a portion of the money. Like the fact that nobody has said anything is just really problematic is in my mind as far as that goes. So, and this is important to think about as well. And I know I brought this up with you gentlemen before when we spoke recently. You've got experts like Art Brand looking into this and others that are looking into the heist. And they've almost sort of advocated to a certain degree, getting them, them being more involved with it instead of just Anthony Amore and the FBI. The thing about it is I'm not so sure that the experts are really going to help us solve this, the art recovery experts. And the reason why I think that is because the art recovery experts are outstanding as long as that artwork made its way into the traditional underworld channels related to the art trade, illicit art trade. If the stuff never made it into those channels, I don't know how these art recovery experts are going to really help, because at that point, it's just basically a garden variety crime. At the end of the day, if the two guys that ripped off the Gardner Museum are a couple of guys earning minimum wage at Radio Shack, and they decided to just do this thing and to cash in on the insurance money, for example, they rip it off. 2 days later, they realize there's no insurance money to be had because it was publicized in the media. And they decide, you know what? If there's one thing I value more than the money associated with this artwork, it's my freedom. Therefore, I'm going to stick this in my attic or something like that and just leave it alone and let's see what happens. How is it ever going to get found by, the quote unquote art recovery experts. I would argue that the person who would actually be best positioned to find it would be one of the aforementioned Boston police officers, not a corrupt one, but somebody a little more local, like a local law enforcement official, or even just, frankly, a sleuth, an internet sleuth, or somebody like that who just does some prodding around. So, I also point to the fact that it's been 32 years, and we have experts like Art Brand and others that have been looking at this thing and, have played certain roles in trying to recover it, and nothing has come of it. Nothing has come of that. And to me, it's almost sort of an indication of, okay, well, perhaps the reason nothing has come of it, these investigations by these experts, these art recovery experts, is because we're just looking in the wrong spot. I mean, again, that artwork is not floating around in those channels. It's just not there. It's somewhere else. So that's something worth keeping in mind as well. I'm of the opinion, and I think the statistics bear it out, that the artwork never left the United States. I also think the statistics bear out that the artwork is probably in Boston or very near Boston, somewhere around the New England area. And I also think that it's unlikely that the artwork was separated. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say all 13 pieces are together. And the reason why I say that, again, is because we've heard nothing about any of these pieces anywhere. And it just stands to reason in my diseased mind that if you've got, all of a sudden pieces flying all over the place among, being trafficked among several different unsavory individuals all over the place, I'm just having a really hard time, guys, believing that nobody said, you know what? Yeah, I could use 5 million or $1 million or whatever right now to turn this stuff over, a portion of this artwork over. I just have a really hard time with that.
What's your next step?
I'm glad you asked that question, because there is a next step. Again, the objective, let's identify the objective. The objective is to recover the art. That's the first thing. Let's recover that art or some of the art or whatever we can come up with. So that's the first thing. I think we have to start looking at other suspects. And the only reason I say we have to start looking at other suspects is because we have to start searching somewhere. We got to get boots on the ground. We got to start putting holes in the ground. We got to start tearing out walls. We got to start looking in dark, creepy attics in storage facilities and things of that nature. But we have to start somewhere. And I think working with, looking at exploring other suspects, I think is a good way to go about it, because it may provide us a sense of some direction or somewhere to start. I'll give you an example. Brian Mcdevitt. Brian Mcdevitt is somebody that the FBI and apparently Anthony and Morey have written off, said no way in hell Brian Mcdevitt was involved with this thing. I'll just tell you what, I've looked at Mcdevitt in a lot of detail. And for those of you who don't know, Mcdevitt's a guy who tried doing the same damn thing 10 years earlier, 1980, at the Hyde Museum in New York, and failed. Did a couple of years in jail and, whatever. I've looked at Brian Mcdevitt in a lot of detail here, and I can say that I've been unable to come up with anything to eliminate this guy as a suspect. And there's a lot of circumstantial stuff that points to him as well. Now, Mcdevitt's no longer alive. He apparently passed away in 2004, but he's the kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that I think I would be looking at very closely, and his relationships back then very closely, to see if they know anything. Mcdevitt had a girlfriend that he dated back then, 1990. Fortunately, she kept a very detailed diary of what was going on at that time, unbeknownst to her, during the heist. And there are a lot of things in that diary that I think are highly suspect, that, definitely are worth considering. So to sort of categorically dismiss a guy like Brian Mcdevitt out of the realm of suspects just doesn't make any sense to me. One other thing that's worth considering as far as Mcdevitt is concerned is Randy, one of the guards, Randy, the guy that I'm, absolutely convinced had absolutely nothing to do with this. He said that with 90 to 95% certainty that it was Brian Mcdevitt, that he was the guy who chained him up in the basement. 90 to 95% certain Mcdevitt was the guy who did it. Now, I realize people have faulty memories, and sometimes, your mind kind of goes askew after a period of time. But these are the kind of things that I can't overlook. I'm like, that's something that's worth considering there. So what that means as far as all this goes, what I'm inclined to do is worked a Mcdevitt angle, worked the angle from other suspects. If I can identify areas of town they lived, places that they frequented, associates, things of that nature, that provides a starting point as far as looking into, again, the backyards with, ground penetrating radar, or, looking inside of interior walls of places or in attics or things of that nature, or perhaps talking with people that they know closely and seeing if there's something there. Brian Mcdevitt's old girlfriend, the one that I referenced a few minutes ago, happens to live in the same town I live in. I live in the Phoenix, Arizona area. She happens to live here, so I've got a chance to get to know her pretty well. And I've told her, I said, speaking with you is invaluable, because there may be something in there, something that you wrote or something that you recall that to you is meaningless, means nothing. But to me, or to somebody that's looking at this from an investigative perspective, may realize that, holy crap, he said this, or he did this, or he went where. I mean, that may provide, there may be a nugget of something there that just opens the whole thing up, or blows the whole case wide open. So that's what I'm doing. That's the path that I'm pursuing. I'm looking at other suspects, and ultimately that's going to involve getting boots on the ground there and doing exactly what I said, putting holes in the ground, tearing up walls, and slinking around through dark, creaky attics with spiders and everything else. And let's see if that stuff's out there, because I believe, brothers, that stuff's out there. I think the 13 pieces are out there somewhere, just waiting to be found.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts with us here today, and we really appreciate it. If you need any help with anything, please let us know. We will certainly lend our assistance wherever we can, and I think it's a great thing that you're looking into new suspects. Again, let us know if anything comes up, and whatever you do, don't look into my dad.
Well, fair enough. Okay.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. And yeah, if you need any help, of course, like Tim said, we're here for you. And anytime you have a development, let us know. If you feel like it's show worthy, we'd love to have you back on.
Perfect. I appreciate it very much. It's been a lot of fun, and look forward to being in Boston again shortly. And we'll all go out and grab a few beers and talk about this thing.